Well, hello and welcome back. So, today's episode is brought to you by my daughter. One of my daughters came to me with a quote that they saw on social media. And as soon as I read it, I thought, oh, yes, we definitely need to do an episode on this. She'd brought it to my attention and said, I think this would really resonate with your audience. And she was 100% right. So, here's the thought that popped up in her feed. It said, just because you can understand why someone is acting the way they are, it doesn't mean that you have to tolerate it. Let me read that one more time. Just because you can understand why someone is acting the way they are, it doesn't mean that you have to tolerate it. And as soon as I heard that, I decided then and there that yes, this definitely needs to be a podcast episode because as you know, I work with the empaths and the highly sensitive people. And while empathy can totally be an incredible superpower, sometimes it can actually perpetuate toxic behaviors and toxic relationships if we are not well boundaried. So I wanted to really kind of break this down today and help you to really set some healthy boundaries so that you can have more meaningful, more authentic connections and have that balanced reciprocation in a relationship where you feel safe and secure. Because for this population, we remain stuck in these toxic relationships because we can feel so deeply how it is the other person feels. We can understand exactly why they're acting the way that they are, but this understanding does not mean that you have to tolerate these toxic behaviors. And because we feel so deeply for them, oftentimes we're actually making up excuses for them, which does not actually create accountability and does not actually create change, and it does actually keep us stuck. So let me give you a few examples about what this can look like. Sarah had been dating Mark for about 2 years now, and when they first met, then Mark told Sarah all about his traumatic and abusive childhood. Sarah, as the compassionate person that she is, she really felt for him. And because she really cared deeply about him and his well-being and could see all of his amazing potential, then she committed to be there for him in his healing. But the thing is, while Mark was fully aware of how his childhood was impacting his relationship with Sarah, he wasn't actually making any changes. Instead, he was using it as an excuse for his controlling behavior and for the emotional abuse that Sarah was experiencing in the relationship. So when Sarah would call him out on his behaviors, then he would make comments like, well, you know why I am this way. If you really loved me, you would love all of me. Now, what he's doing here is he's flipping it and making it about her, where she is now the one who needs to change. She needs to be more loving. She needs to be more accepting. And then he doesn't have to change, right? He's now made it her responsibility to change, and he has made himself so now he doesn't have to create any changes at all, which is in fact an emotional manipulation. He is placing that responsibility on Sarah rather than taking ownership. All right, example number 2, there's this friend that you have that just always wants you to show up for them. They want you to empathize with them and their experience and show up in love and kindness and support for them, but they aren't always there for you. And they might just not be there for you, but maybe they're even one-upping whatever it is that you're sharing an experience. They're saying, well, my situation is worse, so now I get the spotlight. Or, well, what you're going through really isn't that big of a deal. Let's talk about me and why you should be showing up for me. And in fact, this might actually be helpful for you because then you'll know how much worse life could be, and then you'll feel so much better. But again, this is an emotional manipulation, and all of the responsibility is now on you rather than them actually creating that change. All right, example number 3, the parent-child relationship. So this might be a parent that's coming home and saying, well, hey, you know I've had a really rough day, so you need to accommodate me and you need to just give me a pass on my yelling, my hitting, my controlling behavior, my slamming doors and really scaring you. Okay, so I don't need to apologize to you. In fact, you should be apologizing to me for, oh, I'm just so sorry that you had such a rough day. You should be tolerating my mistreatment of you because you understand that I had a rough day. Now, this leads to the parentified child. And this is essentially the child that they feel personally responsible for the parent's health and well-being, maybe even their financial situation. The child is taking that on, and they are now being the parent for their parent, right? So, and this can really create a significant imbalance in relationships. So if you find that you are a parentified child and that you feel personally responsible for your parents' mental and emotional well-being or their financial situation, come and work with me. I can absolutely help you with that. So in each of these examples, then the victim of these toxic behaviors, they actually believe that they must actually tolerate that mistreatment. Otherwise, they're going to be the bad guy. They're going to be unempathetic. They're going to be uncompassionate if they do not continue to show up for this person because they know what a hard time that other person's going through. And this is where we might find that we're making excuses for the other person and their behavior. So notice if you're in a relationship with somebody like this, notice if they are using their experience as an excuse for their mistreatment of you, or if they're sharing through the lens of accountable explanation, right? Notice if they're making an excuse or an explanation. And if they're making an explanation, you're going to see that they're actually taking steps proactively in order to fix what is that's going on. They're actually accountable for their actions. So for example, the excuse is going to be saying things like, well, I am the way that I am, and you just need to accept it, because if you were a good and a loving person, you would love and accept me as I am, because I'm just a wounded being. And this is just me and my experience, right? They're not taking accountability. Or it might sound like, hey, remember that one time when I was really good to you? I know it was a few months back, but that one time I was really, really good to you. Remember? Now, when they say this, they're essentially asking you to ignore all of the times that they weren't good to you. That no, you need to keep showing up for me because that one time I was nice, right? Now, remember what they're essentially telling you is, oh, they are capable of showing up for me. They've just decided not to, right? So if you're coming and saying, hey, I could really use a little bit more time, love, attention, affection. And they're saying, well, remember that one time? You're dismissing all of the good things I did. They're giving you an excuse. Excuses might also sound like, well, hey, I have a really good reason for why I'm treating you this way. And so because I have a good reason, you have to tolerate it, right? But they're not actually apologizing. So when you hear statements like this, know that they are in fact making excuses. These are not apologies. These are statements that are avoiding accountability. And they actually have no intention of actually changing their behavior. In fact, instead, they are actually asking you to continue to tolerate their mistreatment and continue to be super understanding. But the truth is that they are not being understanding of you when it comes to the impact that their behaviors are having on you. They are not being empathetic or understanding. They're dismissing or devaluing or minimizing your experience, and they're telling you that they're not going to change. So now let's kind of talk a bit about what it sounds like when someone is accountable for their actions. So an accountable explanation is going to sound more like, hey, I know that I had a really rough day and I took it out on you. I'm sorry, and I'm going to work on finding healthier outlets for my frustration. An accountable explanation is going to sound like, wow, I can see now that I just acted in the same way that my abusive parent acted, and that is not a cycle that I want to repeat. I'm going to seek help so that I can better navigate my emotions and find healthier coping mechanisms. An accountable explanation might sound more like, hey, thank you so much for bringing this to my attention. I was acting poorly, and I want to acknowledge how painful that must have been for you. I am so sorry. I love you, and I do want to change because I don't want to hurt you. And then here's the key is they actually take those steps in order to create change. When you take something to somebody, notice if they're taking ownership or if they're flipping it into an excuse for their negative behavior. So if when you take something to someone, if you're hearing, well, I had a rough day, or, well, I was drunk and I didn't mean it, or, but you know that I'm not usually like that. They're actually making excuses for their behavior, and they're actually telling you in that moment who they are. Now, when somebody tells you who they are, believe them. When you're hearing these excuses, believe them that they are going to make excuses and that they actually have no intention of change. They did not make any promises of change. They did not make any declarations of accountability. So you know now that they're not going to change and they don't want to be accountable for their actions. Use that as information and believe them when they tell you who they are. You are not responsible for their healing. So even though you can understand why they're acting poorly, it is not your job to heal them. They need to heal themselves. And if they're telling you excuses rather than actually creating change for themselves, they're not being accountable for their behaviors. And if we choose to remain in relationship when they're not actually being accountable for their actions, we are in fact enabling their negative behaviors. We're telling them that, oh, it's okay. I will still stay even if I'm treated poorly. And that's not actually going to help them to heal. We are in fact perpetuating these negative habits and these negative behaviors because we're saying, yes, yes, I will continue to stay with you, even though I know you're not healing, even though I know you're not doing the work, because I can understand your why. Now, I want you to listen really closely, is we teach other people how to treat us through the behaviors that we are willing to tolerate. And yes, I am going to repeat that. We teach other people how to treat us by the behaviors that we are and are not willing to tolerate. Now, I may have shared this here on the podcast before, but it's a great story, so I'm going to share it again. So I was recently re-listening to the book, A Return to Love by Marianne Williamson, and she shared a story in there about a time when she was mistreated. Her date didn't show up for the date. And when she called him, then he just said, yeah, I got busy. And that's it. He didn't apologize. He didn't even have an excuse. He just totally minimized her experience and her emotions by just saying, yeah, I didn't pick you up for the date because I got busy. No big deal, right? Now, she had a lot of time to think about how it was that she wanted to show up in this situation. It was really interesting to hear her talk about the experience because she really wanted to find a way where she could approach this conversation with a place of love for herself as well as love for this other person. But one thing that she kept saying in there was unconditional love, I can understand, but not unconditional dating. And I really want you to sit with that for a minute, that she was able to distinguish between unconditional love, that yes, I can love this person, but that does not mean that I have to tolerate mistreatment or that I have to date this person, right? She knew that if she was going to date somebody, she needed to be okay with how it was that she was being treated in that relationship. And she was not okay with being asked out and then left waiting and then be ignored for 2 weeks. She saw this as a red flag and a huge sign of incompatibility. Now, the people pleaser in us likes to not only make up excuses for other people, but it likes to believe that we have more control over them than we actually do. So the highly sensitive mind wants to believe that if I keep showing up for them, if I keep extending love, if I keep modeling positive behavior, then they will change. And it's wonderful to model those things. And there are some situations where, sure, that can be helpful. And also, what is going to speak even louder is the behaviors that we are and are not willing to tolerate. So if you keep tolerating mistreatment under the guise of love or under the guise of acceptance, then the message they're going to be receiving is, oh, guess what? I can treat them this way and they'll totally forgive me and it will be fine. I don't have to change. They will change to accommodate me because they're such a nice person, but they're not actually creating that change. So when this guy in the book eventually did call her up and asked her out again, then she just kindly let him know that, hey, you know what? I just don't think that we're a good fit. But I do hope that you're able to find what it is that you're looking for. She was able to just set a boundary that, nope, it's not what I'm looking for, but I love you enough that I hope you find what you're looking for, and that's a great thing. Now, of course, when she said this, he was initially a little bit hurt and maybe a little bit confused and thinking, okay, well, what's going on? How come she's being so nice to me and I'm being rejected? But she was able to be proactive about, yeah, those are behaviors that I am not going to tolerate. And I can accept that this is how that person is going to show up, but I don't have to tolerate and I don't have to accept that mistreatment, right? I can know that, okay, occasionally they're going to stand me up and then ignore me for 2 weeks. And when that happens, I'm not going to go crawling back. I'm not going to just pretend like it never happened because that is not sustainable for me and that is not what I'm actually looking for. She chose to prioritize genuine connection and belonging over acceptance. And sometimes that's exactly why we tolerate that mistreatment, is we think that if I tolerate this mistreatment, then it will lead to that connection and that belonging and that acceptance. But what we're actually showing them is that we are willing to accept this mistreatment. And if we're willing to accept that mistreatment, they don't really have much incentive to better themselves or to create that change. So sometimes we do think that, okay, if I tolerate this mistreatment, then they'll see how much I love them and then they'll be inspired to change and then they'll start to show up in amazing ways for me and we can finally have that beautiful relationship that I know that they're capable of. And so we keep showing up in amazing ways for them. But this isn't often the case. It's oftentimes not going to come back to us in the way that we would like. So one thing I want to point out to you is that if somebody is telling you, well, hey, this is just who I am, they're communicating to you that I am going to make an excuse, that you must love and accept me. And they have zero intention of changing. Okay, so the message is, well, if you love me, you need to love all of me, which is a truth, right? All of us want to be in a relationship with people that love us as fully us and that don't really want us to change. But we still tend to fall into a relationship with people hoping that they will change. So really coming to radically accept people as they are and recognize, okay, do I want to continue this relationship or not? What behaviors do I want to continue to tolerate? And is that relationship worth it to me? Do I want to continue to tolerate this mistreatment just in order to keep this relationship around that isn't serving me? We like to think, well, no, like I can help them to heal. I can heal them. We tend to have a little bit of a savior complex where we think, but if I can just love them through it, then everything will be okay. So notice if they're telling you like, no, this is just who I am and you have to accept it, just believe them. When they tell you who they are, believe them and then act accordingly, adjust accordingly, respond accordingly, and let them know that their behaviors are not things that you're willing to tolerate. One of my favorite quotes on boundaries comes from Prentice Hemphill, and it reads, "A boundary is the distance at which I can love you and me simultaneously." And let me read that one more time. A boundary is the distance at which I can love you and me simultaneously. When we're tolerating mistreatment, we might be thinking that we're extending love to the other person, but really we're not loving them where they're at because we keep hoping that they'll change. And we are not loving ourselves where we are at, because we're not keeping ourselves in a safe space. We're not setting those healthy boundaries. We aren't loving ourselves or them when we're tolerating mistreatment. It's okay to create something that is more sustainable for you. And in fact, that might be exactly what they need in order to create change. So let me give you some examples quick about what boundary setting can look like as you work to create more safety and security for yourself, as well as accountability for the other person. All right, example 1, excusing emotional manipulation. So the toxic behavior is that your partner frequently guilt trips you by saying things like, I act this way because I had a rough childhood, so you should understand and support me. So a healthy boundary might sound like, understanding why you feel this way doesn't mean that I have to tolerate emotional manipulation. I need you to take responsibility for your actions and work on healthier ways to communicate. All right, example number 2, you might find that you're actually enabling narcissistic behavior. So the toxic behavior might be the friend who's constantly belittling you in an effort to make themselves look better, right? So saying, well, hey, I need constant validation because of my insecurities, but they're also not willing to validate you and your experience. So setting a healthy boundary here might sound like saying something like, I understand that you struggle with insecurity, but I won't tolerate constant belittling and attention-seeking behavior. I need our relationship to be balanced and respectful. All right, example number 3, physical abuse. So the toxic behavior might be that you have a family member who is physically abusing you. And they're saying, well, I can't control my anger because of stress. You know how hard life has been on me. So a healthy boundary might sound like, understanding your stress doesn't mean that I have to tolerate physical abuse. I need to prioritize my safety and well-being. If you can't control your anger, I will need to distance myself and get myself to a safe place. Now, in each of these examples, we're using empathy to illustrate that, yes, I do understand why you're behaving this way, but it's also setting a healthy boundary so that we don't need to tolerate that mistreatment. Setting healthy boundaries, it involves recognizing that understanding someone's reasons does not necessitate enduring harmful behavior. It's about prioritizing self-respect and safety and your own personal emotional well-being, while also encouraging the other person to take accountability and seek healthier ways to interact. So, hey, if you find that you are in a toxic relationship, see if you can identify what's coming up for you. First of all, what is it that you are seeking in that relationship? And is the person giving you excuses, or are they actually being accountable for their actions? If you need help and support kind of sorting through how to navigate those relationships and how to set healthy boundaries, come and work with me. I would love to work with you. I'm currently offering 6-week packages, and so my clients are always kind of coming and going. So if you would like to work with me, go ahead and click the link in the show notes and come and apply to work with me now. You are someone who is so worthy of so much, and you do have an incredible heart. And sometimes we do have to extend that same love and compassion to ourselves in order to create that safety and healing for us. And guess what? The better you become at being able to create that safety and security for self and extend that self-love, the more likely is that you'll be able to have those healthy relationships that you are seeking. You are 100% lovable, and I totally believe this. All right, I hope you have a great week, and let's talk soon. Bye now.